Welcome to Humanity, the epicenter of ideas surrounding transformative change that will revolutionize the way our world interacts with technology.
How do you close the digital divide in low-income communities? Our guest today will describe how empowered the next generation by building the 21st century Boys and Girls Club. I'm Kevin Castle, and welcome to the Humanity Podcast. Our mission is to build a better future for humanity by informing and empowering the public through powerful dialogue with IT visionaries. Joining me today is Robert Santana, CEO of the Boys and Girls Club of Central Orange Coast. As a social entrepreneur and disruptor, Robert promotes the positivity and health development of youth through services that build the skills, civility, and self-confidence necessary to succeed. Robert, welcome to the Humanity Podcast.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Really happy to have you on the show and talk about, first thing I'd like to talk about is just really your backstory, right? I've had the pleasure of knowing and working alongside you for the past, 5 years now, right? But I would love to hear myself again, and also for the guests to hear your backstory, both as a CEO and as a leader, as well as your involvement and kind of where you've moved the Boys and Girls Club of Central Orange Coast.
Thank you. Again, really excited to be here. I'm excited to talk about the digital divide and just the access gap between kids that have access to technology and kids that don't, and how we are able to close that gap and make sure that all young people have the opportunity to pursue the greatness that's inside them and for them to achieve success. My leadership journey starts here in Orange County. I grew up in Santa Ana, and I didn't really realize until I was an adult all the opportunities that I had access to. It wasn't until I started volunteering and eventually working at the Boys and Girls Club that I started to understand the power of mentorship and the influence that people have on each other. I was very fortunate to have an older brother that, I looked up to. He was 5 years older, someone that, kept me in line. In hindsight, having that support system as a kid, as a young person, helped me stay, driven and focused around who I wanted to be. Prior to the Boys and Girls Club, I was in law enforcement. I was in the security forces, in the Air Force, and my path on that, in that timeline was to be a police officer. So I was able to, serve in law enforcement, and had originally moved back after my service in the Air Force to Orange County so I could be a police officer in Los Angeles. And so I'd gone through that whole process. It was a year-long hiring process, and had a start date. And during a time between jobs, and I was supposed to kind of start kind of my career here in LA. I had something just kind of inside me, kind of influenced me to think about where I wanted to go with my life. And, I wish I could say that at the time it was clear. In hindsight, everything kind of fell into place. But at the time I was really concerned, that I was doing something because I was good at it, but it wasn't something that I was no longer, I was as passionate about as when I first started in law enforcement. I had a degree in law enforcement. I had built that network and had put a lot of effort into going into that field. But I realized kind of on a personal level that I was an entrepreneur, and that I'm not a good employee. I think I need room to create and do things differently. And so I went to volunteer at the Boys and Girls Club for, at the time, I thought it was going to be 2 to 3 weeks. And it ended up changing my life, seeing these young people, seeing the potential that they had to do great things. And for me to be part of that experience to help young people find their voice, find their passion, and pursue their greatness. I also, as an entrepreneur, saw a nonprofit with a charity mindset. So it had a good story and a good mission, and 60-year history before I got there.
Right.
But it was so comfortable being good. Okay. And I saw this potential to be something so much better, so much different, and so much bigger. And so, it's been 15 years since I started as a volunteer, and it's been a great journey to see the organization become one of the largest Boys and Girls Clubs, one of the most innovative clubs, and more importantly, to see, the cycle of poverty, break for several, families as we look at providing them a pathway to pursue a different trajectory. We're changing the trajectory of a family tree based on the work that we're doing as a Boys and Girls Club.
Right. And so since it was such an instrumental moment for both your life and the thousands of kids that you've impacted and all the employees at the Boys and Girls Club, what was it that moment that made you decide to do that 2 to 3 week stint, right? To volunteer? Because that was really the crossroad, right?
It was exactly that moment for me. I'd been a DARE officer. I don't know if you remember that program, where police officers spend time in the classroom. So I'd already had some time in the classroom, and something inside me was telling me that I belonged in a different environment. And specifically, I looked at it as I'm meeting adults that have gone off the path, right? I'm meeting with people typically on the worst day of their life as a police officer, and I'm responding to something. And I looked at the experience at the Boys and Girls Club, and at the time I'd considered maybe being a teacher. Mm-hmm. And I saw that as an opportunity for me to just get involved in someone's life at a much earlier point, so I can prevent them from going down the wrong path. And so that was as simplistic as it was. It was like, well, maybe I can prevent some of these kids from ever getting into trouble to begin with.
Okay.
And, very early on, it was, I should be a teacher. I learned very quickly, if I wasn't a good employee and wouldn't like to be a police officer and follow all those rules, I definitely wouldn't be a good teacher being told what to do on a day-to-day basis. And I have a great deal of respect for both those career fields. And I also feel that specifically in those two types of careers, the people that are in those jobs should be people that absolutely love what they do and are made for those jobs. If at any point you don't have 110% of your heart in that job, you have the responsibility to leave those two career fields, because you're putting people, at risk. So I realized I love working with kids. I'm an entrepreneur. I have this background and expertise in law enforcement. And it just so happens that being the CEO of the Boys and Girls Club allows me to use and leverage every area of my background and work experience and passions all intersect there. And there isn't a day that I don't use something from my law enforcement background and something from my degree in child development, and certainly something from my MBA that, allows me to lead the Boys and Girls Club a specific way.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Interesting. How much do you think the law enforcement side of your background impacted that decision and impacts kind of how you think now?
Usually law enforcement and entrepreneurship are not the same, skill set. I think where it's helped me create a unique blend is I'm flexible and I'm a big thinker, and I'm always kind of, looking at a big picture. But at the same time, I have a high level of respect for structure and discipline and follow through. And so sometimes an entrepreneur is great at developing an idea, but not with the execution. And having that military law enforcement background helps. I don't know that I'm the best at all those little details, but it certainly helps me hold myself and the people around me to a high level of standard. And so, there are times that as I'm leading the Boys and Girls Club and as we're doing strategic planning with our team, I'll hear my, 20-year-old self in the military approach it a certain way. Like, you have to have structure and in policies or procedures. And even the way that we practice in the military, as you look at the United States military, we're the best as an armed forces because of how we train for every possible scenario, right? There's practice and practice. When businesses implement those types of protocols, you're ready for when there's, things like what we're seeing right now with this pandemic. And so, in the military, it's referred to as mission readiness. Are you ready and prepared for, different types of scenarios? And so in our world and, leading a company, it's the same lens. How do I make sure that we're ready for the new challenges and obstacles that are going to be in front of us?
Right. All right. So now you're volunteering Boys and Girls. I'm taking back 15 years, right?
Yeah.
So then you lead, then you start leading this organization. And then there's a couple of key moments over the last several years that you've been merging, you've been taking various roles, you've done somewhat of a strategy change from keeping kids fun and playing activity to like preparing them for the future. So tell me about that journey, right? Because I think that's what gravitated me to 5 years ago to reaching out to you.
So I was 25 when I went to volunteer at the Boys and Girls Club. And certainly as I walked in and I saw kids that grew up in the neighborhood that I grew up in, I saw myself, right? And I could see these young kids and I could see myself at that age. I was pretty naive, as I think, you normally are at 25, where you think you kind of have things figured out. And so I remember thinking, is this it? Right? I would ask staff as a volunteer, what's the mission? What do we do here? And the number one answer that I would get consistently was, we keep kids off the street. And every time someone said that, it was like nails on the chalkboard for me. They would say it with a level of pride, like, oh, we keep kids off the street. And it was almost like bragging. Yeah. And if you grow up in a tough neighborhood, it's better to have them off the streets than on the streets. But I just remember thinking at the time, being so unimpressed with that bar, right? Like, well, can't anyone do that? Like, I always kind of joked, like, pizza keeps kids off the street. Xbox can keep kids off the street. At some point, though, they're going to get bored with whatever they're doing and they're going to go right back on the street. There has to be some strategy around, all right, we kept them off the street. Now what do we do with them there? And so I came in asking questions, and one of my theories around leadership is that the greatest leaders are not the ones that have all the right answers, right? For us to pretend we know everything is just, it's misleading to people, right?
Right.
I think the greatest leaders are the ones that know how to ask the right questions at the right time. And so I started my experience at the Boys and Girls Club as a volunteer by asking obnoxious questions like, why do we exist? And, what is it that we do here? I was a volunteer for 2 to 3 weeks, and then they offered me a job. I didn't think at the time that wasn't the goal whatsoever. It was just, I'm going to spend a couple weeks, meet a couple kids and then move on. And so just because at the time of my life, I was really searching for who I wanted to be, and this opportunity presented itself. And I was very comfortable with just listening to the universe and just doing what I felt was right. And so I felt at the time, all right, I'll stay here for a year, do what I can, serve, hopefully leave it better than how I found it, and then I'll move on. So that's my original decision to join the staff. And so within 2 years of me volunteering, I was asked to be the CEO of the organization. My first year was really focused around implementing leadership structure and kind of internally fixing the culture of the organization. It had been around for 60 years, but the opportunity that I saw was for us to challenge the status quo and really take the organization from good to great. And that required mindset and culture and leadership. So after that first year, I was asked to step in as CEO. And I've been 3 types of CEO in that kind of, dozen or so years. The first couple of years was turnaround, really focusing on the basics. The next, season for me was focused around beta testing, new ideas, and really kind of getting people comfortable with change and understanding that flexibility is a skill.
Yep.
And so we were trying a couple of new things and really starting to focus around some growth. So we added maybe a site or 2 sites a year. And then the phase that we're in now, and my role as a leader and where we've been for the last few years is large scale impact, large scale growth. And so, in 15 years, we've gone from 1 site, 12 staff members serving about 150 kids, to now serving 9,500 kids this last year across 66 locations, with a head count of over 150 professional staff, and really recognized as one of the leading kind of Boys and Girls Clubs in the area as we look at innovation and challenging the status quo and creating kind of a regional large scale footprint,
right? So
we can serve more kids and efficiently.
Right. And I think so along that journey that you just ran through, from like time you started, asked to join, becoming CEO in 2 years at 25, right? Making those big jumps. At the time that I was introduced to you, I actually had the pleasure to see you speak at the Vistage Orange County All Cities conference at the convention center in Anaheim. I think that's where it was that year. And you went up there on stage, and there was a couple thousand people in the audience. And for those that don't know, Vistage is a CEO executive forum that meets once a week. And the format is it's your peer advisory group. And you reached to your peers there as a way to get advice that you wouldn't typically get when it's lonely on top, right? So you went up there and you were talking about, we have this responsibility for the kids. And at this time you were leading the Santa Ana Club, right? It's just only the Santa Ana Club at that time, right? And you made this conscious choice and challenge to the group. And I remember it being almost like a challenge, like, don't we have a responsibility to do more for our kids? And what would it look like if we have this gift of their time and their eyes and their brains and their attention? What can we do to help them to be ready for the jobs of the future, right? And to me, that call to action that we threw out to the group was so impactful to me that I reached out to you the next day.
Yep.
And my organization, we tried to figure out ways that we could help and just share stories with the kids. And, over the last 5 years, we've ran a couple of development events and taught the kids to code and done some things like that, right? But the core of it, we're looking at Santa Ana community and specifically Orange County. And for those kids that are on the, difficult chasm to cross in this digital divide, how do we help them, right? And there's so many parts of that. Sometimes it's an idea, sometimes it's helping with the basics, sometimes it's showing them a path or showing them that it's possible, right? And so whenever we've catered to those moments where we get a chance to work with the kids, we're always very conscious of what step along the journey are we trying to make? Is this like an idea planning, or is this kind of like painting the future and showing them that this is possible? So I guess when you made that transition for the club, what are you seeing? What made you decide to do that for kids, specifically in STEM and technology? And what was it like to change, a 60-year-old organization that was comfortable with being good, and now you're challenging status quo and bringing this challenge to the table?
So when I was asked to speak at the All City event for Vistage, I had just completed like a 2-month sabbatical program where I visited high-performing organizations, nonprofit, for-profits, and I would just spend the day kind of picking someone's brains. And I got to visit different industries, and I was in this headspace of, I've done something, now what, right? And so at the time, we just finished construction on the Santa Ana Boys and Girls Club. We'd built these just, phenomenal tech rooms in the building. And I remember at the time, prior to construction, I'd read a case study on Taco Bell in the mid-90s around a new CEO that came in. And at the time, the Taco Bell store was structured, I believe it was like 80% kitchen and about 20% seating space.
Okay.
And so they went to this centralized kitchen format. So then these Taco Bells basically became assembly lines as opposed to kind of full restaurants. And then they flipped the model. So now the kitchen was about 20%. And then now there was more seating, about 80%. And what that did is it just created this boom for the restaurant around efficiencies and quality control. And obviously we've seen them grow. And I remember reading this case study. I was doing a leadership program at Harvard Business School. I remember reading this case study and then asking myself, how can I apply that lesson to the Boys and Girls Club? And where that applied was the computer room. Every Boys and Girls Club up until that point had a room that was used for computers. Sure. And kids would all go to that room. And because it's, 15 or 20 or 30 computers versus the 200 or so kids that are in the building, you'd always have to schedule when the kids can go into the computer lab.
Sure.
And schools are designed this way. Mm-hmm. So what I did was I flipped the model literally with the architect. As we were designing the building, what if we turn the entire facility into a tech center? We eliminate the computer lab and we went to mobile devices, increased, bandwidth into the building. Uh-huh. And we just kind of shook this idea that we needed a computer lab. And that has now become the prototype for the types of buildings that we've designed. Mm-hmm. And other Boys and Girls Clubs across the country have replicated that. But that speech that I'd given was right at this kind of, point in my life where I had just gotten so comfortable being naive and just so comfortable not knowing the answers to everything. and leaning into that as a leader, that I was going to become really good at asking obnoxious, tough questions. And if I remember, the challenge that I made to all the CEOs in that room was, what questions can you ask your team and yourself as an owner that is going to change the way that you look at your business? Because every day that you wake up, someone else wakes up wanting to eat your breakfast. And so you have to think like that startup CEO, how are you going to change your trajectory? And what's funny about that speech is Vistage asked me to audition for it.
Okay.
And they required me to write a speech in order to do that. So I don't ever write my speeches. So I did it because they needed to review it. They approved it. And then I had to do a dress rehearsal the day before. And then I did that speech. And then the day that I actually was asked to speak, I just threw that entire speech away and I just did my own thing. And they told me after that they were pretty scared in the first couple seconds. They realized I was not on script whatsoever.
Oh, funny.
But luckily it worked out and we got to, meet with you and you've joined our board since then.
That's really funny. Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. I think you make a lot of people nervous when you're not.
Possibly.
All right. So at that time we start working together a little bit, right? And then you guys go and you build out this whole, like a series of different programs within the club that are all tailored to help kids to deal with this digital divide challenge, right? Or even just the technology skill set shortage that the United States has right now, right? I think when I was first talking to you, I'm like, the social economic movement of the Santa Ana area, are we that much better off than other parts of the world? And it doesn't seem to be that we have that upward mobility that technology jobs or other that have provided in so many other communities or countries, right? So what can we do for Santa Ana? That was, I think, what I reached out to you to talk about that. So once you guys have set this programs in place, what have you seen so far?
Yes, I mean, we're at this unique kind of crossroads where technology is moving at an exponential pace, right? And so, you buy a device and within 30 days, your device is considered to be old, right?
Yeah.
You go back to the Apple store and they laugh because you have last year's model. And so we're so fortunate that innovation is moving at such a fast pace in tech that it's affecting all businesses and it's becoming a lot more affordable. And so all these things are great, right? And we have several 3D printers in all of our buildings. I remember buying our first 3D printer and how much we spent for it, and just recently bought just a slate of 3D printers and just how more affordable they are, for us these days. But, as I have an obligation in that we serve young people to prepare them for the jobs that will exist in their lifetime. And the way that I say it is I'm preparing kids for jobs that don't exist yet. And understanding that we don't need to know all the specific details. We don't need to know what the job titles are going to be. We don't, need to know all the specifics. What we need to know is what are the type of skills that they will need in order to be successful in their lifetime, right? It's easy for us to teach kids based on the capacity and the learning that we've, had.
Yeah.
But when we do that, we're very narrow-minded to think that the jobs or the opportunities that exist will be the same ones that we had. If we've done our job right as leaders, we're going to give our young people a different world, and then they can take it from there and move the ball forward. So as we look at this, entrepreneurship is a skill, team building is a skill, critical thinking. The school system is obviously challenged in the way that it has to educate kids. There has to be more to a children's education. And that's why in more affluent communities, you're going to see parents send their kids to coding camps and have them sign up for sports and, have them participate in all these different activities because, we recognize that kids need all these other services. In our low income communities where, our mission is to break the cycle of poverty, we have the responsibility to make sure all those kids have the same type of activities. It's not fair for us to think that the jobs of the 21st century, developers and engineers will only be filled by kids that grow up in more affluent zip codes.
Right.
The real world does not care what city you were born into or how much money your parents make. The real world rewards hustle. And if you are willing to come in and learn, and the responsibility we have as a Boys and Girls Club is to challenge kids and families differently. And so by providing 3D printers and Chromebooks and laptops and iPads and robotics and making sure that kids actually touch these technologies, it allows us to create momentum and to spark learning. I look for those light bulb moments. I know for me, I've been influenced along the way when I've learned something that has created a passion for me. And so as the CEO of the Boys and Girls Club, I try to create the environment for light bulb moments, right? So we as a staff value discovery and curiosity and challenging the status quo so that kids are constantly learning and enjoy, that space of learning something new for the first time, and just that euphoria that happens when you feel like you just accomplished something. And, whether it's shooting your first, basketball and winning a game, or building your first robot, like it's something that is special that you did that as an individual. You achieved that milestone.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that parallel too, right? So that's interesting. So have you seen, you rolled this out about 5 years ago, right? We rolled this out about 5. So, what's the impact been that you guys have seen kind of in the trajectory post high school or into high school, and with the kids that you're still kind of touching and involved with?
So a few things. One is we learned very quickly that what we were building out, thinking that this was like a long runway, kids consume content way faster than we do. So I remember our first, robotics program. It was expensive. We trained our staff, and I don't know, it was very naive of me to think, well, this is going to take care of us for about a year. Literally weeks, the kids blew through it, and they were asking for more. And what it did for me as a CEO is really helped me realize that we needed to change the mindset and the infrastructure of our organization, because there's this appetite for learning. Yeah. And if you feed that appetite, it's positive energy. It requires more, right? And so we ended up shifting around our entire infrastructure just so that we can develop more content. And I always kind of describe it as like the Netflix generation. We're so used to binge watching. We consume things faster. And there's this appetite, I think, for learning. And so the old way of Boys and Girls Club just didn't fit anymore. You could develop a program, use it for a couple years, polish it and use it again. Now it's like kids are just churning through this stuff. And so to see kids go through this stuff and, to your question, they've outgrown my skill set. I love being the dumbest person in the room, and then recognizing that we have this expertise. And to put it in perspective, we started an internship program a couple years ago over the summer where we bring on, high school students. And we were designing some buildings last year. And I remember coming home one day and realizing that I had just spent three or 4 hours with this high school student, and me taking notes, like literally filled up like a notepad, because I kept asking him what we should be doing in this field of space or in the field of tech, and how we could be designing space. And I remember coming home and thinking, I just spent I've been doing this for a while. I'm fairly good at my job. And I had no problem whatsoever taking almost all the advice from a 16 or 17-year-old kid, and that having a direct influence in how we were designing space and maker spaces and stuff like that. And just thinking, at the time, I was like, we used to think of smart people as the oldest people in the room, the people that had been around the longest and had this experience. Now, because of the shift in what skills are the most relevant, it really doesn't matter how long you've been doing something or whether you have a college degree in a specific space. It's, do you know this specific relevant skill better than this person? And if that is true, you can have a 16 or 17-year-old kid lead the discussion around where we should be going. And so I think that the shift of smartness has kind of moved, and, it's great as an advocate for young people. That's what we would want.
Right.
And if you think about in history, oftentimes the youngest person in the organization is rarely heard, rarely given the opportunity to speak and influence. We use our own kids to give us their take on things, and it has a direct influence on where we're going as an organization.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really, really interesting. All right, I have a couple of stats I wanted to throw at you because I remember talking to you about, hey, there's this major talent shortage in the United States between technology jobs, and how do we prepare? I mean, there's as you're describing, like, the learnability that kids have. How do we teach that skill, or critical thinking? Those are all skills that apply kind of across all STEM, given that our focus is really in the technology area. I wanted to go through a couple of tech stats, right? So the forecast, Korn Ferry had a forecast that by 2030, there'll be an 8.5 trillion annual shortage of not having tech jobs filled because of the talent shortage. We've got 200,000 new technology jobs created every year in the United States. And about 63% of executives say that talent shortage, this is from Gartner at the beginning of this year, that the talent shortage, 63% saying is one of their top biggest challenges they have as an organization, right? And on average, it takes 50% longer to fill any technology job, and 70% of technology positions are empty for longer than a couple of months, unfilled. So there's a serious challenge that we have as a nation. And, those types of challenges are impacted in a number of ways. And one is at the community level, right? So given that, what would you say for any listener who may have a technology background, or what would you say to help with these challenges that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, or problems that you're solving with your influence as CEO of the Boys and Girls Club that people can get involved with?
A few thoughts. One is, some of those stats are fairly consistent with what we've known for a few years, right? Around the gap, the talent gap. Mm-hmm. Some of them have gotten worse. Yeah. And all of a sudden these projections are even more dire than they were before. And so, we have a responsibility as leaders today to think about the future. These problems are not overnight solutions. It's not like we could just, fill those gaps immediately. We have to think about the young people today that are in elementary school and what their education should look like, so that they're prepared for the jobs. It used to be that if you had a high school diploma, you were qualified to go into, a variety of different career fields. Right. That's no longer the case. And it used to be if you had a college degree, you could come right out of college and go right into a career. I just had a call today with someone that I'm mentoring, just graduated college, and he's not sure how he's going to get a job in his space. And so we have to think about that. The other piece of it is we have a responsibility as leaders to mentor and support the next generation of leaders, right? And I have a theory that there is no such thing as a self-made person, right? People could say that about themselves, and, who am I to question that? But every successful person that I've known, every successful person that I've ever learned about, read about, is successful because of the generosity of other people. Mm-hmm. I'm a product not of just me. I'm a product of my older brother, the mentors that I've had in life, the teachers that I've had along the way, the friends that have helped me, as I process things. I have benefited from mentorship, which is why I've dedicated my life to this type of work, is to make sure that I'm creating large scale impact for mentors. Mm-hmm. And so even if you don't work for a nonprofit like the Boys and Girls Club, if you're in a company, you have a responsibility to support your team around you, especially those new people that join, your company. And so I think that how we address this gap is by being selfless. We have to think about how we got here ourselves and how we have this responsibility to help other people. Mm-hmm. But imagine where you were, and you and I have talked about this when we first met, when you were first introduced to computer science, and your first thought was, why didn't someone teach me about this when I was younger, right? And
I chose my major when I never had owned a computer. It was the first thing, like they said computer, and then it had science after it. I'm like, all right, never owned a computer.
But one thing that you and I have talked about over the years is just your level of passion to help spark the same level of excitement that you had when you first went into this field for young people. And I have the same level of excitement to help a young person find their voice, whether it's in tech, whether it's in other fields, but to help someone, challenge themselves to think that way. as we think about this is a crisis. What we're saying is we have this need for our society to move forward, and we don't know how we're going to fill that need, right? And the frustrating part is we talk about unemployment, we talk about all these jobs that are getting phased out, but then there's all these other opportunities. And I'm an optimist. I choose to be an optimist. I would much rather say, how do we talk about preparing people for these jobs than to fight for these jobs that are being phased out by the marketplace, right? And so I do believe that there's opportunity for young people to think differently and to go into these fields, and they're exciting. I mean, for kids to learn through STEM is fun and exciting and challenges them to think differently. I read these stats as well. I also, as an optimist, feel that we will find these solutions, and that we will find a way to connect, people to these types of jobs. Running a company and being an advisor to a few other companies, I hear this all the time. I have a job opening, I'm meeting people, not finding the right fit, and it hurts because you know that you have something at stake. You have to lead a company a certain way. You can't just let anyone in. But the way that we cultivate talent in this country and at the local level is by starting with young people. Because if we start at high school or after high school, you now have to put a level of energy and work to getting that person ready for a job. And if they haven't been on the right trajectory leading up to that point, it's very difficult to, at that point, change their way. It's really important that we start at the entry level and really at kindergarten. How do we prepare kids, for this? And there's different types of SMART. Most recently I was introduced, there's IQ, there's EQ. Most recently I was introduced to AQ, adaptability. How well do you adapt? I think that that's going to be the most important kind of skill set of this next generation of leaders, is how flexible are you? Because the world is moving at such a fast pace, and it's just, shifting so much that the ones that can adjust and be flexible and adapt to any environment are always going to be the ones that do the best, at what they do.
Well, surely tis the season for that, right? It's a skill set that's going to make or break things.
When you find out if you were flexible or not.
Right. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you spending the time with us, Robert. I think, when you said, the curriculum that you put together for a year, in about a week, the kids were blasting through it and you guys were on your heels trying to figure out how to keep them going is truly impactful and shows kind of the impact that you guys are making. So thank you for being on. If anybody has any interest in getting involved, we'll put contact information for yourself or for myself as a board member for the Boys and Girls Club to figure out ways that we could partner up together to help the local youth, and know that, our goal is to truly make an impact. And we believe that it starts at the community level to do so. So that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for tuning into the Humanity Podcast, and appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.